She was barefoot, standing on the porch of cabin 3B, holding a glass of wine she didn't pay for, wearing a flannel that didn't belong to her. It was Sawyer's. I knew because I had the same one. Company merch. We all got one in the gift bags when we checked in. She never wore mine. She leaned against the railing like she owned the view. All calm, confident, her hair up in that careless way that always used to undo me. She was laughing softly at something I couldn't hear, but I didn't need the audio. I could tell by her face. The way she tilted her head. The way her hand tapped lightly against her thigh. That's how she laughed when she wanted to be noticed. And he noticed. Sawyer stepped out behind her, real casual, like he belonged in her space. In her gravity. His hand brushed her shoulder. She didn't move away. I had arrived 5 hours earlier than planned. Switched flights without telling anyone. Told myself it was because of the weather forecast, but I knew better. I'd seen her messages the night before. She was texting someone under a saved name. M.K. Problem is, her brother's name is Mike. And this M.K. had sent a shirtless selfie captioned, "Will I see you there before the welcome dinner?" She had replied with a heart. I never confronted her. I just packed a bag and moved my flight. Then I spent 5 hours pretending I was fine while chewing my tongue raw in a lift that smelled like almonds and wet dog. And now here I was, watching my wife flirt with another man on a porch that faced the lake. She didn't know I was there. She thought I'd be flying in late tomorrow. She thought this was her weekend to breathe, to be someone else, away from the boring, awkward guy she barely touched anymore. The guy who made grocery lists and cried during animated movies and always picked the wrong kind of bread. But I was already at the retreat, already checked in, already watching, and I wasn't sure what hurt more, that she lied, or that she looked so alive without me. I didn't go back to my cabin. I stayed hidden, half-crouched behind one of those massive decorative planters they had lined up outside the main lodge. My back ached, my knee throbbed, but I couldn't move. Not until they did. It was pathetic, I know. A grown man spying on his own wife like a deranged squirrel. But you can't unsee something like that and just walk away. You need to know how deep the rot goes. Eventually, they left the porch. Not in separate directions. Not like coworkers. They walked off together, his hand briefly touching the small of her back. Just a second. Barely anything. But her reaction was everything. The way her shoulders dropped. Like she was finally exhaling. Like being around him was easier than being around me. I waited 10 minutes before I moved. Long enough to make sure no one saw me. I wasn't ready for questions. I wasn't ready for small talk, or worse, fake smiles. I followed the gravel path behind the cabins and looped toward the dining hall. It was loud with laughter and jazz and corporate forced fun energy. I stepped inside like nothing was wrong, like my world hadn't just tilted sideways. She wasn't in there. Neither was Sawyer. Of course they weren't. I grabbed a drink. Something red and strong that burned more than it comforted. I stood near a fake fireplace and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I looked tired. Hollow. The kind of man who probably misplaced his wedding ring a lot and didn't even realize until someone pointed it out. I wore mine. She didn't. Said it got in the way when she typed. That's when I saw them again. Through the reflection in the glass. They'd re-entered from the back patio. She had changed, swapped the flannel for a long cardigan I didn't recognize. Her lipstick had faded. She didn't look flustered. She looked centered. He was standing too close. But the thing that ruined me? The way she introduced him to the VP of product. Not as her coworker. Not even Sawyer. She said, "This is my person. My person." We used to say that. That was our thing. I finished the drink in one long, shaking gulp and headed straight for the bathroom. Locked myself in a stall and sat on the closed toilet lid like some teenager skipping class. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. My throat burned. And the silence in there, it just magnified everything. I started asking myself the questions I'd been avoiding for months. Had she emotionally checked out already? Was this just the first time I caught it? Or had it been going on? Little stolen moments in elevators, after-hour Slack messages, harmless coffee runs that weren't so harmless? Had she replaced me without saying it out loud? I wanted to text her, ask where she was, pretend I didn't know. But my fingers hovered above the keyboard, useless. What would I say? "Hey babe, enjoying the retreat? I saw you and Sawyer through the bushes and had a minor panic attack by the flower pots." No, I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because if I played it right, if I didn't say anything, didn't flinch, I might find out everything without even having to ask. She didn't know I'd arrived. She didn't know I'd seen the way she looked at him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the one advantage I had left. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in the cabin bed, fully clothed, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan that didn't move. Every creak of wood, every distant laugh outside made my chest tighten. I kept thinking I'd hear her footsteps, that she'd come knocking, that maybe, somehow, she'd know I was there, that she'd feel me like some ghost she couldn't shake off. But she never came, and the only sounds that reached my door were coyotes and the occasional crunch of gravel under someone else's feet. In the morning, I went to the breakfast buffet like a man performing a role. I smiled. I nodded. I filled my plate with food I couldn't taste. The others were already there, buzzing like hungover bees, talking about Eskimo and hikes, and someone doing cannonballs in the hot tub after midnight. I wasn't in any of those stories. I wasn't even background noise. She walked in 20 minutes later. Morgan, fresh-faced, hair still damp from the shower, sunglasses on top of her head like she hadn't done anything wrong. She wore a yellow hoodie, mine. I forgot I even packed it in her bag last fall. She said it made her look too soft. Apparently, not anymore. She scanned the room like she owned it. When her eyes landed on me, something flickered. Surprise? Guilt? I couldn't tell. But she hit it fast. Walked straight over and hugged me like I hadn't just watched her play house with someone else the night before. Wes, I didn't know you got in already, she said, all wide-eyed and sugary. Late flight, I muttered, stiff in her arms. That's awesome, though. Now we're both here, she said, as if this were the dream scenario. I nodded like it was. My throat burned with words I didn't say. I wanted to scream, "Who the hell is your person now?" But instead I smiled and spooned eggs onto my plate. Sawyer walked in a moment later, laughing with two other guys. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. In fact, he waved. Friendly. Confident. Like he wasn't the guy wearing my wife's attention like a second skin. Morgan didn't introduce us. Not officially. Later that morning, we broke off into team-building groups for some lakeside activity. Kayaking. Because nothing says corporate bonding like throwing introverts into water with people they barely know. I ended up with some back-end developer named Ian who smelled like sunscreen and beef jerky. We barely spoke, and I didn't care. I was watching her. Morgan. She and Sawyer shared a boat. Of course they did. I tried not to let it show. I kept my sunglasses on, played dumb, let the silence fester. But it was eating me alive. Every synchronized paddle, every burst of laughter that echoed across the water, it made my stomach turn. And the worst part? She looked more herself with him than she had with me in months. I kept thinking, did she fall in love with someone else while I was still trying to fix us? Was she already gone, and I just didn't notice? Or worse, did she try to tell me, and I just didn't listen? Back on shore, while everyone dried off and snacked on granola bars, Morgan walked over and offered me a towel. You look good out there, she said. I looked at her, really looked. Her cheeks flushed, her lips chapped from the wind, hair tangled from the lake breeze. I wanted to ask her why she lied, why she hid Sawyer, why she pretended like we weren't slowly bleeding out in silence. But all I said was, I thought you hated kayaking. She paused, just a second too long, then smiled. Guess I changed. She hadn't changed. She'd just stopped pretending. And now she was trying to make sure I didn't catch up. But I was already watching, and I wasn't going to look away again. That night, there was a bonfire by the lake. It was one of those events the company pretends is optional, but secretly tracks attendance for. The kind where someone passes around acoustic guitars, people force jokes about spreadsheets, and the extroverts roast marshmallows while the rest of us pretend to text someone interesting. I showed up because I had to, not because I wanted to, not because I had anything left to smile about. Morgan was already there when I arrived. She was sitting on a bench near the fire, a blanket draped over her lap like some kind of campfire queen. Sawyer was beside her, not touching her this time, but close enough that their shoulders brushed every time she laughed. And she laughed a lot, like the air was easier to breathe around him. When she saw me, she lit up like I was a surprise party she hadn't planned for. She patted the empty space beside her like everything was normal. I didn't sit there. I found a log a few feet away, next to a junior dev I barely knew. I nodded like everything was fine, like I wasn't seconds from unraveling. I watched them from the corner of my eye, the easy body language, the shared drink, the inside jokes I wasn't part of. I caught pieces of it. Something about her high school prom. Something about Wes would have hated that. And they both laughed. I nearly threw my cup into the fire. Instead, I stood up and walked away. Not toward the cabins. Not toward my room. I went around the back of the lodge, toward the empty trail that led down by the boathouse. It was quiet there. Just trees, shadows, and my own breathing. I needed the silence. I needed something that didn't remind me of her. And then I heard footsteps, crunching slowly behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew the rhythm. I knew the pace. "Wes," she called out soft. I didn't answer right away. She caught up, slipping her hands into the sleeves of her hoodie like a nervous teenager. "Hey, are you okay?" I forced a laugh. "You mean aside from being the third wheel in my own marriage?" Her mouth twitched. "Don't say that." "Why not? It's accurate." I turned to face her. "Do you even realize how you act around him?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Sawyer, don't say his name like he's just some random guy," I snapped. "You think I don't see it? The way you look at him. The way you two whisper and vanish and act like the rest of us don't exist?" She looked away. "It's not like that." "Then tell me what it is." Silence. The trees were louder than she was. "Finally," she said, "he listens to me." My heart cracked in a new place I didn't know existed. And I don't. She looked back at me then, eyes glassy. "I don't know, Wes. It's like, with you, everything always feels heavy. Every conversation turns into a therapy session or an argument or silence. With him, I can just breathe. I don't have to explain every sigh or every bad mood. I'm just me." I swallowed. Hard. "So what? You're saying you're happier with him?" "No," she said, too quickly. "I'm saying I don't know how to be happy with us anymore." And that's when I realized something that made my stomach turn. She hadn't cheated yet. But she wanted to. She was waiting for the excuse. The moment. The catalyst to tip her into it. And I'd just given her the speech she'd used to justify it. "I don't know how to be happy with us anymore." That would be the line. That would be the sentence she quoted when someone asked what went wrong. It sounded innocent. Sad. Even noble. But it was a weapon. It gave her permission to burn the house down while pretending she was just cold. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked back toward the fire. She didn't follow me. Not that time. She stayed behind, alone in the dark, pretending it was Sawyer who made her feel seen, not the distance she built brick by brick between us. I sat back down by the fire and stared into the flames, wondering how many pieces a person could break into before they stopped being worth gluing back together. The next morning, I woke up angry at the sun. It pushed through the cabin window too brightly, too confidently, like it had no idea my world was falling apart. My mouth tasted like ash and regret. I hadn't even drunk the night before. Just stared into the fire too long and thought about all the things I should have said over the past year, but didn't. All the little moments where I saw her slipping and chose silence because I thought it was kinder. I thought letting her breathe would bring her back to me. She didn't come back. Breakfast was another forced parade of cheerful banter. I sat at a table full of people I didn't know, chewing dry pancakes and pretending I wasn't scanning the room every 30 seconds. She wasn't there. Neither was Sawyer. I stirred my coffee for 10 whole minutes before finally standing up and walking outside. That's when I saw them. Across the lawn, near the edge of the woods, just out of earshot from the rest of the group, Morgan, with her arms folded across her chest, Sawyer standing close, talking low and fast. Her posture was tense, like she was arguing or resisting. But then she did something that dropped my stomach straight through my shoes. She touched his chest. Not in a romantic way, not overt. But her hand rested there, right over his heart, just long enough to mean something. I couldn't feel my hands. I stood there frozen, halfway hidden behind one of those giant wooden archways someone thought made the lodge look rustic and cozy. I wanted to walk over. I wanted to shout, throw something, pull her away and demand answers in front of everyone. I wanted chaos. But instead, I stood there watching, paralyzed by the kind of fear that doesn't scream, it whispers. What if I confront her, and she doesn't deny it? What if she tells me the truth? What if I already know it? She walked away from him first, wiping something from her eye. He stayed back, rubbing the bridge of his nose like a man who'd been dealt a bad hand, but still had the nerve to bet the table. I didn't say anything to her the rest of the day. Not at the mid-morning strategy session. Not during the silent yoga class someone thought was a bonding exercise. Not even when we ended up on the same hiking trail and she asked if my knee was still bothering me. I just nodded, kept my eyes ahead, and let the silence spread like a crack across glass. She hated it. Morgan always needed things tidy, smoothed over, wrapped up with a bow. Even our fights had to end with a conclusion. She used to say, "Let's not sleep with open wounds." Now, we were sleeping in separate beds with scars we refused to show. That night was the final dinner. Long tables, white lights, toasts from people who thought this weekend had brought them closer together. I watched her from across the room, her face carefully controlled, but I knew her well enough to see the nerves twitching in her fingers. She stood to give a thank you speech. She was always good at those. Warm, articulate, the perfect blend of humble and charming. But this time, she stumbled. Mid-sentence. Lost her place. Said we when she meant I. She looked over at me, and for the first time all weekend, she looked scared. I didn't smile. I didn't save her. And I didn't clap when she finished. After dinner, while people drank and packed and flirted and promised to keep in touch, I went to the front desk and asked for a copy of the guest log. It took some convincing. I said I'd misplaced something and needed to know who checked in before me. I lied, politely. The woman on duty, Jen or Jenny or something like that, finally pulled up the names. Sawyer checked in the morning before the event officially began. She did too. They arrived on the same shuttle. One that wasn't company-sponsored. I stared at the screen, reading the timestamps over and over like maybe I'd misinterpreted it. But no, they came early. Together. And she still acted surprised when I showed up. I stepped outside and felt the cold hit my face like a slap. Somewhere behind me, people were singing some awful acoustic cover of a pop song. I walked toward the woods. No plan. No destination. Just the aching need to move, to not be still, to not feel like I was choking on everything I hadn't said. My phone buzzed. A message from her. "Can we talk tonight?" I stared at it, my thumb hovering. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure which version of her would be waiting when I did. The one who promised to fight for us. Or the one already planning how to explain me away. I didn't go back to the cabin right away. Her message sat unread on my screen. But it didn't matter. I knew she saw that delivered. She always had read receipts turned off. Said it created pressure. Which, looking back, is exactly the kind of phrase someone uses when they plan to live in gray areas. The wind had picked up. The trees creaked like they were warning me not to go back. I found a bench near the edge of the woods, behind the bike shed, just far enough from the lights of the lodge to feel invisible. I sat there for almost an hour. No music, no distractions, just the sound of my own heart beating too fast, and 100 thoughts chasing each other in circles. She showed up eventually. Didn't text again. Didn't call my name. Just walked slowly across the grass, hoodie pulled tight around her neck, like she was the one who had something to be afraid of. "Hey," she said softly. I didn't move. She sat beside me without asking. I could smell her shampoo. Same kind she's used for years. Lavender and some other flower I never remember. I'd always liked that about her, how she never changed scents. As if some part of her stayed consistent, even when everything else shifted. "I was going to tell you," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a statement. It was a line, something she'd rehearsed. "How long?" I asked. My voice surprised me, flat, but not cold, like I'd stepped outside of myself. She took a breath. "Nothing happened, Wes. Not like you think. We didn't. I didn't cheat." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "We started talking more a few months ago. At first it was just venting. He was going through a breakup, and I didn't think it was anything." "You never do," I said, and I hated how bitter it sounded. But I didn't take it back. She looked down at her hands. Then I started looking forward to our talks. He'd message me late, ask how I was. He noticed things. He'd remember if I said I had a rough meeting. He'd check in. "You used to do that too, you know." "I still do." "Not the same way," she said, and it landed like a punch I didn't see coming. "With you, it's like everything's been about fixing, optimizing. You try to solve me instead of just being there." I stood up. Not dramatically, not in anger, just because I suddenly couldn't sit still. I walked a few steps, then turned to face her. "So what? You let him replace me because I started asking what was wrong instead of pretending everything was fine." "No," she said quickly. "I didn't let him replace you." "But he did." Silence again. The kind that stretches too long, where even the wind seems to hold its breath. "I wasn't planning to fall for him," she said finally, voice cracking. "It just happened, and I hated myself for it. I kept thinking it would stop, that I'd snap out of it, that it was just a fantasy. But then the retreat came up, and I thought if I saw him here, maybe I'd get closure. Maybe I'd realize it wasn't real. And she didn't answer. And that was the answer. I laughed, but it sounded like choking. You know what the worst part is? I came here thinking maybe this weekend would save us. I thought if we were just in the same space, away from work, away from everything, you'd remember us. You'd remember me. I did, she said quietly. That first night, when I saw you from across the room, I remembered. But it didn't matter, I said, because he was already in your head. No, she said, standing up too now. He was in my heart, Wes. That's what you don't get. It's not just about who bought me coffee or who texted me good luck. It's about how I feel when I'm with you now. I feel like I disappoint you all the time. Like I'm this problem you haven't figured out how to fix. With him, I just breathe. I turned away. I couldn't look at her anymore. Not like this. Not as someone I loved. Because the version of her that stood in front of me, crying in a borrowed hoodie, asking for forgiveness without ever using the word sorry, that wasn't the woman I married. That was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. You should go back, I said. People are probably wondering where you are. And what about you? She asked. I didn't turn around. I don't think anyone's wondering about me. She left a minute later. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't try to hug me. Just walked off into the dark. And for the first time in years, I let her go without following. I didn't go back to the main lodge. I didn't say goodnight to anyone or pretend to enjoy one last group photo by the fire pit. I wandered the grounds like a ghost, one hand stuffed in my pocket, the other gripping the phone I couldn't decide whether to throw or use. I passed couples kissing under string lights, coworkers hugging like war buddies after a long campaign of awkward small talk and team synergy games. Everyone looked so proud of what they thought they'd built. I had built something too, something that took years, something I used to believe was unshakable. And now I was watching it rot quietly beneath the surface, like a house with perfect paint but termites in the beams. I walked until the lights of the resort faded behind me, and the trail narrowed into silence. I found a picnic bench by the lake and sat until the stars were the only witnesses left. No sound but frogs and the occasional ripple of water. I tried to think clearly, to process. But every thought led me back to one thing. She was already gone, and I never saw her leave. When I returned to the cabin, it was nearly 2 a.m. I cracked the door as quietly as I could, expecting her to be asleep. But she wasn't. She was sitting at the small table, still dressed, arms folded on the surface like she'd been waiting. I paused in the doorway. Why are you still up? Couldn't sleep, she said. You disappeared. You noticed. She flinched. Can we talk now? We already did, I said, kicking off my shoes. She stood slowly. I know you're hurting. I know I made mistakes. But I didn't sleep with him. I swear. I looked up, finally meeting her eyes. You think that's the part I'm stuck on? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I'm not some child waiting for the adults to confirm if Santa's real or not. I continued. I don't need receipts. I don't care if you technically didn't cross the line. You wanted to. You crossed it in your mind months ago, Morgan. You left me emotionally and hoped I'd be too quiet to call it out. That's not fair. No, I said. It's not. She sat down again, the chair creaking under her. So what now? Are you going to leave? Funny, I said. I was about to ask you the same thing. She blinked. I sat across from her, elbows on the table, not touching. I'm not the guy who throws people out. You know that. I'm the guy who waits too long, who makes lists and suggestions and thinks maybe if I fix one more thing, they'll stay. I've been that guy with you for years. I didn't ask you to be, she said quietly. I know, I said. That's the part that hurts most. We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't the kind that asks for resolution. It was the kind that surrenders. No more accusations, no more defense. Just two people surrounded by the dust of what used to be sacred. I'll leave in the morning, she said finally. You don't have to. She looked at me, confused. I mean, don't do the dramatic checkout just for show, I added. You can stay through breakfast. Finish your goodbye tour. Hug everyone, smile, pretend everything's fine. Just, when you do go, don't leave a note. Don't send me some long text about how I'm a good man and you're just lost. Don't try to soften the landing. Just be gone. She nodded once, slowly. Okay. I stood, walked past her, reached for my jacket on the hook. Where are you going? She asked. For a walk. Again. Yeah, I said. But this time, I'm not coming back for you. and I left before she could say anything else. I didn't cry. I didn't break down or punch a wall or text some friend with vague quotes about pain. I just walked. I let the cold bite my skin and the silence hum between my ribs. Because for once, I didn't need a plan. I didn't need closure. I didn't even need her to explain herself. I was finally ready to live with what I already knew. In the version of our marriage she now wanted, there was no space left for me, and I was done begging to fit. The retreat ended like most fake corporate getaways do, with forced laughter over lukewarm coffee and too many LinkedIn connections that no one would ever follow up on. I kept my distance. I said goodbye to exactly no one. The funny thing was, no one really noticed. Or maybe they did, and just didn't know what to say to the guy whose wife had been emotionally orbiting someone else all weekend. Morgan stayed true to her word. She didn't leave early, didn't make a scene. She smiled in the group photo, clapped during closing remarks, even hugged the VP of sales like she wasn't unraveling. And when it was time to check out, she handed in her room key without looking back. We rode in the same shuttle to the airport. We didn't sit together. I stared out the window and thought about how small the world looks from a moving car, how even the trees that seemed endless on foot suddenly blur into background noise when you're finally leaving. She didn't say goodbye at the terminal. No text, no voicemail, no last look over the shoulder. I expected to feel broken. I really did. For days, I'd imagined this moment as the collapse, the final confirmation that I'd been replaced, that I wasn't enough, that I'd lost. But it didn't come. Because somewhere between that last walk and that first mile home, I felt something else settle in. Relief. It didn't make sense at first. How could you lose the person you build a life with and feel lighter? But that's the thing no one tells you about being in the wrong relationship for too long. The end doesn't always shatter you. Sometimes it frees you. I went back to our apartment. She hadn't packed yet. Her side of the closet still looked full. Her toothbrush was still in the holder. Her jacket still on the hook. But I knew she wasn't coming back. Not really. And I didn't need to beg her to. I took a few days off work. Told my boss I was recalibrating. He didn't ask questions. I think he'd seen it coming. I spent those days doing things I hadn't done in years. I made pancakes at 3 a.m. I rewatched movies she always called too slow. I walked until my legs hurt, and then walked farther. I even bought a houseplant. A stupid little fern. I named it Leo. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to care for something that didn't talk back or drift away. A week later, she texted. Just one sentence. Can we talk? I stared at it for a while. Then I wrote back. We did. You just weren't listening. And I never heard from her again. Months passed. I started writing again, something I'd abandoned during our 3rd year of marriage. I reconnected with my brother. Joined a local book club even though I was the youngest one by 15 years. I said yes to things that scared me. I took the trip to Oregon alone that we always said we would together. And I watched the ocean for hours without saying a word. For once, silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like healing. Morgan didn't ruin me. She reminded me what it feels like to forget yourself in someone else's shadow. And now? Now I remember what my own light feels like.